America years ago and was not seen by anyone for 2.5 years. And thanks to our great work with our partners in the government of India and overseas, we literally captured her for the first time in 2.5 years. She is now in FBI custody, and she's on her way to face prosecution in the state of...
At 11:26 p.m. inside a sealed federal briefing room in Minneapolis, the statement sounded clean, like it had been rehearsed for cameras. 7 coordinated sites, 206 personnel involved, 45 victims located in critical condition, 31 fraudulent immigration packets recovered, and 1 operation named Ghost Campus. Then the official at the podium, voice flat, eyes exhausted, delivered the line that changed what everyone thought this was. "This is not a school scandal," he paused. "This is a manufactured pipeline." And the hard claim followed, heavy enough to silence the room. "This may be the most disturbing institutional deception ever uncovered in Minnesota." He promised transparency. He promised arrests. He promised accountability. But then he leaned forward, as if he was speaking directly to you. Because that's how you keep people watching when the truth gets ugly. We're going to show you how deep it goes. Another pause. And the next part is worse. Because the next part wasn't just about a so-called university. It was about a system that looked official enough to fool the vulnerable. A ghost university that existed on paper, on websites, on letterhead, and in carefully staged offices. But not in reality. And when the raid started, they didn't begin with a lecture hall. They began with locked doors, with transport schedules, with lists, and with a task force commander whose authority didn't just chase criminals, it shaped outcomes. In this fictional story, his name is Commander Grant S. Halden. Border Enforcement Chief. Federal Task Force Authority. A man celebrated in internal memos as decisive. A man who behind closed doors had become something else. Not a protector. A gatekeeper. And the night he lost control, Minneapolis woke up to a different kind of fear. At 4:32 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. The city was still asleep, but the air was already moving. Thin wind sliding down empty streets, bending the steam rising from sewer grates. The sky was black and low, cloud cover reflecting the orange glow of streetlights until everything looked like it was filmed through smoke. A distant siren wailed once and stopped. Not reassurance. A signal. On the edge of an industrial strip near the river, unmarked vehicles rolled in without headlights. FBI agents stepped out first, boots quiet on frozen pavement. ICE tactical units moved next. Tight formation, radios muted. DIA teams were there too, because in real life, deception networks don't stay in one lane. Fraud shares corridors with narcotics. Exploitation shares routes with cash. Daesh support sealed the perimeter and cut off the exits. And SWAT, local and federal, stacked at the first door like a wall of intent. They weren't hitting one place. They were hitting the whole illusion at once. A registrar's office in a downtown suite with no students, a housing support center in a suburban strip mall, a warehouse listed as educational supplies, a private residence used as a holding site, a small clinic front that advertised student health services, a rideshare dispatch hub that scheduled movements before dawn, and a quiet storefront with a banner that read, "Welcome, International Students." At 4:33 a.m., the first breach. A ram hit metal. The lock held for half a second, then snapped. A flashbang detonated and turned the hallway white. Agents flowed in like shadow and steel, voices cutting through the shock. Federal agents. On the ground, hands inside the registrar's office, desks were staged like a showroom. A row of cheap computers, stacks of glossy brochures. a framed accreditation certificate that looked real until you looked closer. No personal items. No coffee cups. No mess. Nothing lived in. Because real workplaces have clutter, fraud has symmetry. A suspect ran toward a back room with a laptop hugged to his chest. An agent tackled him before he reached the door. The laptop hit the floor hard, the screen cracked, but the drive stayed intact. Across town, at 4:41 a.m., SWAT hit the warehouse labeled educational supplies. The air inside was colder than outside because the building had industrial cooling running in January. That's never normal. Not for paper, not for books. They cracked open the first pallet, not textbooks. Medical gloves, IV tubing, boxes of sedatives, some legitimate, some gray market, some unmarked. Then another pallet, blank ID cards. Laminators, stacks of printed enrollment letters with identical formatting and different names. Agents moved deeper and found a locked cage. Inside, duffel bags. Cash in tight bricks, not billions. Not movie money. But enough to tell you this wasn't a hobby. And taped to the inside of one duffel was a handwritten code list: Blue X cocaine, white ducks, pills green cuck students. A DEA agent stared at it for a long second. Because that's when you realize the worst part. When people get categorized like inventory. At 4:58 a.m., ICE teams hit a suburban student housing address. From the outside, it looked like a normal rental. Inside, it felt wrong immediately. Mattresses on the floor, windows covered, locks installed on interior doors, no decorations, no sense of a home. In the kitchen, a whiteboard listed names and dates, pickup times, drop-off points, a schedule that looked like class registration at first glance, until you read the notes in the margins. Quiet, no phones. Eye contact ducks trouble. Compliance ducks extension. In an upstairs room, they found 45 girls, some barely conscious, some shaking, some with fevered eyes that tracked every movement like a trapped animal. Critical, the medic whispered, not because they were injured from a single event, but because they had been worn down slowly. Dehydration, infection, neglect, fear. The kind of condition you don't get from one bad night. You get it from a system. One agent, voice softened for the first time that morning, said, "You're safe now, but if you're listening closely, you already know the truth. Safety doesn't arrive just because a door opens. Safety arrives when the people who built the door are removed." At 5:16 a.m., another team hit the student health clinic. The front lobby had posters about wellness and mental health, a bowl of candy on the counter, a sign and sheet with fake names. In the back, locked cabinets, unlabeled vials, a ledger tracking appointments with times that didn't match any normal clinic. And behind a false panel in a supply closet, agents found encrypted hard drives wrapped in plastic, carefully protected from moisture, like someone cared more about data than human beings. At 5:49 a.m., the twist landed. In the downtown suite behind a framed photo wall of smiling graduates, an agent found a steel box bolted into the studs. It wasn't a safe you buy at a hardware store. It was a sealed case with tamper screws and a serial tag. Inside, a compact phone, a hardware encryption token, and a binder labeled in clean printed text. Halden Clearance Protocol. Not a student file. Not a university record. A protocol. A system manual. And for the first time that morning, the task force felt what it means to be hunted by paperwork. Because this wasn't just a fraud, it had a command signature. At 7:22 a.m. inside a federal cyber forensics lab, analysts worked in silence that felt like pressure. Bright lights, cold air, gloved hands, screens everywhere, evidence bags stacked like bricks. They imaged the drives. They isolated the token. They started cracking the encryption. Not fast, not flashy, just methodical. Because the truth doesn't need drama, it needs access. At 9:03 a.m., the first layer came apart. A network diagram bloomed across the main screen, lines connecting addresses, shell entities, payment processors, and document mills. A master plan appeared. Codename: Project Pale Lantern. Because it was designed to look like guidance, while leading people into darkness. Shell companies registered under student service name. Those corporations formed and dissolved on tight schedules. Sham charities with soft branding. New Horizon Aid. North River Student Relief. Midwest Welcome Foundation. Restaurant chains used for cash commingling. Logistics firms used to disguise transport. A language academy that existed only as a mailbox. Money flowed in disguised transfers, small wires, repeated amounts, stacked patterns. Funds moved across countries, bounced through offshore accounts, returned as donations, then paid out as consulting fees. A conveyor belt of legitimacy. Then they found the authorization layer, a specific digital signature embedded in clearance memos and operational advisories. It wasn't a student. It wasn't a principal. It wasn't a mid-level scammer. It was Commander Grant S. Halden. Fictional. But in this story, his role is everything. Border Enforcement Chief. Federal Task Force Commander. The man whose badge opened doors. The man whose emails could redirect manpower. The man whose risk bulletins could shut down inspections and wave vehicles through. His authorization key was linked to transport corridors, safe house rotations, and the timing of welfare checks that never happened. And the lab supervisor finally said what nobody wanted to say out loud. This is not corruption. He zoomed in on the network map, red nodes pulsing like infections. This is command-level collusion. A beat. And this is not negligence. He pointed to the clearance protocol binder. This is engineered treason, because when the enforcement chief is the one designing blind spots, the blind spots aren't accidental. And the open loop arrived like a cold draft through a locked window. If Halden built the clearance protocol, then the Ghost University was only one campus, and the next phase would be bigger. At 3:48 a.m. the following morning, a command center came alive. Not in Washington, D.C. Not in some distant place. Right there in Minnesota. Because the damage was local and the response had to be immediate. A giant digital map covered the wall, dozens of red markers pulsing across Minneapolis, St. Paul, Bloomington, Eden Prairie, Maple Grove, Brooklyn Park, and smaller towns along the highways. Each marker represented a node of the Ghost University pipeline, a document mill, a safe house, a cash drop business, a transport link, a storage unit, a contact location. The mission briefing dropped numbers like a hammer. Over 1,100 federal agents, multiple SWAT teams staged in strike groups, FBI tactical support for high-risk entries, ICE units assigned to victim recovery and document seizures. DIA teams focused on narcotics intersections because the same corridors that move people often move fentanyl pills, cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine. DACE cyber teams embedded with entry teams to seize servers before any wipe orders could trigger. Black Hawk helicopters on standby for overwatch and rapid extraction if suspects tried to scatter into the river corridors or highway lanes. Armored units positioned for fortified targets, and additional federal support assets placed on alert not for show but for containment if the network attempted mass movement. At 4:19 a.m., the eradication phase began. Simultaneous hits, fast and clean. A document production site disguised as a print shop. Agents found stacks of forged I-20 style enrollment packets, counterfeit transcripts, and a list of tuition payments that were actually laundering entries. A mansion-style rental in the suburbs, drug fortress energy without the drugs on display, security cameras, reinforced doors, and a safe room with hard drives lined up like trophies. A warehouse near a highway junction. Inside, pallets of food products, concealed narcotics, Cocaine bricks and fentanyl pill bundles used as secondary revenue streams moved through the same logistics chain that moved human beings. A small garage converted into a pill press site, primitive but dangerous, producing counterfeit fentanyl pills stamped to resemble pharmaceuticals. A transit house where ICE recovered additional victims, alive, shaken, and terrified of the uniforms because the uniforms had been used against them before. Across multiple sites, agents seized cash, weapons, phones, encrypted servers, fake seals, counterfeit stamps, and communication hubs. And as dawn broke over Minneapolis, the arrests rolled in. Not just low-level handlers, not just fake administrators, key coordinators, financial couriers, security personnel, and eventually, the people who gave the operation cover. One moment stood out. A Somali principal, fictional name Principal Abdirahman Abdi Qasim, walked out of an office building with his hands raised. He didn't run, he didn't scream, he surrendered like someone who knew the math was over. His voice, caught by an agent's body mic, was small. "I only ran the front," he said, but the evidence didn't care about excuses, because fronts are what make pipelines possible. By 10:28 a.m., the impact line was unavoidable. The underworld took more damage in 6 hours than in the last 6 years. Then came the deeper wound. Inside law enforcement, inside government, investigators combed through seized servers, ported emails, dispatch records, patrol grids, internal messages, and risk advisory bulletins. They found compromised personnel, not 1,000, not a fantasy army, but enough to twist the entire local picture. 22 officials flagged across agencies and support roles. 8 enforcement supervisors who approved suspicious resource diversions. 5 contractors with access to facility cameras and building logs. 3 court clerks tied to expedited paperwork. 2 judges' staffers suspected of receiving consulting fees from shell foundations. Names sealed pending internal review. And a chain of smaller hands, dispatchers, schedulers, admin staff, who leaked information like a drip that becomes a flood. Patterns emerged. Patrol relaxations timed to transport windows. Falsified patrol grids so units were always busy away from target corridors. Welfare checks filed as completed without visits. Internal leaks of raid schedules, enough to let certain suspects disappear and certain devices vanish. One honest officer, fictional Sergeant Lena Moravec, stared at a timeline overlay showing how her unit had been rerouted again and again. She didn't cry. She went quiet. Then she said, "They used us." And that is the emotional core you can't fake. Because betrayal doesn't feel like a headline. It feels like your own uniform turning heavy on your shoulders. Federal agents arrested senior planners, people who signed off on resource movement, who controlled building access, who handled risk communications. They weren't armed kingpins. They were administrative power. And administrative power is what makes systems dangerous. The investigators realized what they were looking at: a second secret police force, a parallel enforcement system. Not in the streets. In the memos, in the approvals, in the clearance protocols that told teams where not to look, controlled by the cartel like pipeline managers, and by the main villain whose badge made it all possible, Commander Grant S. Halden. And the final line from the internal review team landed like a promise and a threat. The badge will be rebuilt from the ground up. Then the story zoomed out. Because a ghost university doesn't need a campus to scale. It needs a template. Project Pale Lantern showed routes connecting Minnesota to other states through trucking contractors, student transport services, and cheap short-term rentals booked under rotating identities. Fake grant programs used as cover for office leases. Agricultural corridors used because traffic is constant and attention is limited. Port cities connected by shipping lanes and package swaps. And alongside the human pipeline, narcotics moved. Cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, fentanyl pills, small packages, huge damage. Because when a corridor is protected, criminals fill it with everything. Analysts estimated the network could move tons of narcotics per month without triggering major alarms, not because the system was blind, but because the system was being directed. Shipping manifests altered, vehicle plates rotated, way stations and inspection points conveniently down when convoys passed. And whenever enforcement pressure spiked, the network flooded the zone with administrative noise, paperwork, complaints, legal threats, because bureaucracy can be weaponized like any other tool. The final catastrophic file was found late, buried deep, labeled simply, Pale Lantern/Future State. It described turning the region into a long-term staging corridor, an institutional disguise so convincing that the pipeline could last for decades, not by hiding from government, by impersonating it. And the chilling realization came in one clean typed sentence: legitimacy is the safest cover. Meaning, if the system looks official, people stop asking questions. Now listen closely, because this is where the story stops being about raids and starts being about you. Power doesn't always need open violence. Sometimes it only needs silence and ambition. Sometimes it only needs paperwork and authority. Because the real cost isn't counted in warrants, it's counted in lives. In girls found near critical because someone treated them as collateral. In families shattered by fentanyl pills that never should have reached the street. In neighborhoods hollowed out by cocaine and methamphetamine, moved through corridors built for deception. In honest officers and agents forced to realize the system they served had been used as a weapon against the vulnerable. If you're still watching, tap like so more people see this story. Comment expose if you want corruption, fictional or real-world patterns to be dragged into the light, because darkness is where these systems thrive. And one more time, clearly, so there's no confusion. Names were invented. Events were dramatized for storytelling. But the warning is real. When a university becomes a trap, and the badge becomes a shield for the trap, the raid is only the beginning. The rebuild is the real war.